So my topic is sports performance and the tempo of music. So the context for this situation is that according to many different articles, the first one that we're going to talk about is the fact that the mind has a direct correlation with sports performance. And it was further upon found that every athlete should develop mental skills along with their physical skills, because the mental side is just as important as the physical side, especially when it comes to sports performance. And it was found that through different testings that constant stressors, like in an environment where you're performing and there's a bunch of stress on you, it creates higher levels of uncertainty, which causes like second guessing yourself and probably a poor decision making. And the last thing is that I found for the context is that music entails emotional motor arousal. Music can affect the way you think, and it can affect your emotional state. So the importance of this of my study is that there's no specific. First of all, let's talk about the gap. There's no specificity on the kinds of music that help with stress reduction in the sports setting, and there's nothing done on the perception of teenage males, especially when it comes to sports performance. Most of them are experimental research designs, and they usually test how the time difference of track athlete and like different performances such as football. But mine's done on the perception of it, and the importance of this is that an athlete such as myself, we want to perform at the highest level as we can, and especially in a professional setting, an athlete needs to perform at their highest level at all times. So this leads to my research question: does high tempo and low tempo music help with the perception of sports performance? So my first literature review is broken down into motivation, and it was found that higher level athletes had significantly higher levels of motivation compared to recreational athletes. And this is important because in my study I'll be asking questions of like what kind of competitive level you participate in, whether that be varsity sports, JV sports, or even just recreational sports. And it was found that self-efficacy is the belief that a goal will be accomplished through a series of steps, and this is really important because if you have a greater amount of self-belief, it was found that there'd be a higher chance of you succeeding at what you aim to do. And it was found that people who end up losing their motivation end up doing worse in performance as it affects their mental state. And this is important to my study because my study's on sports performance. And if you lose motivation according to this literature review, then you'll end up doing worse in performance, which is probably important to my study. The second literature review is stress levels, and it was found through a study done by Zhang and her colleagues that sedative music showed significantly lower tension and state anxiety levels. And this is important because if you're more calm and relaxed because of sedative music, you're less likely to make you're less likely to second guess yourself based on the context of my study. And then it was found that high energy songs with high tempos reduces stress levels, and the important thing about this one is that it contradicts the first study, which shows that there's a gap between the two studies. And it was finally found that neither happy nor sad music makes a difference in your stress levels at all. It has no correlation to any of those. The last literature review is emotional responses, and it was found that interpretation can vary depending on the emotional music stimuli, so it really depends on the person. But it was found that the majority of people associated faster tempo with happiness, and it was found also that majority of people associated slower tempo with sadness. And the study was conducted and another study was conducted on college students with excessive anxiety, and it showed that music therapy gets rid of stress. They talked about college kids who were constantly studying for a test, and they found that music therapy before a test really helps with reducing their anxiety levels. So the method I'm going to be performing is a quantitative analysis, and it's broken down into two parts with a subsection. I'm going to do a questionnaire methodology. I'm going to be asking them certain questions, and the next one I'm going to be doing for my data analysis is Pearson correlation based on the Mentor studies. And it was shown that the best way to look at perception through a Pearson correlation was through a Likert scale, because you can transfer the questions that you have into numerical data, 1 through 5. And I'd be utilizing an anonymous survey because it'd be easier to get more respondents from that. For this survey format, I will be collecting background information and data, and this is divided into multiple parts: age / your grade, your ethnicity, religion, and your socioeconomic status. I feel like these demographics would really help in seeing if there could be a correlation to any of the questions that I asked. And for my Likert scale, I asked from strongly agree to strongly disagree, with strongly agree being number 1 and strongly disagree being number 5. And the reason I did this is to transfer them into numerical data points. So this is an example of how I did it. I asked them a question, and then they put 1 through 5, depending on how they believed. So for the recruiting population, it was found, according to another study, it was found that it's easy to get recruiters through emailing surveys to other people. But in this case, since we're in a high school setting, I had an email to instructors. So my estimated participant goal was 150, but the target I actually hit was 154, which was just only 4 participants over. And this is a breakdown of the different demographics that I have. We can see that primarily most of my respondents were white with a 72.3%. And then the second is Asians, and the third is Hispanics / Latinos. This is the age demographic. It was found that majority of the respondents were 15-year-olds, and this would probably be related to the amount of freshmen that responded, because I had around 40% of respondents that were freshmen. And another demographic is broken down into your socioeconomic status, and it was found that 60.6% of my respondents were considered themselves upper middle class, which is extremely significant because it shows there's a huge gap within my study. And since we primarily go to since we all go to Brophy College Preparatory, which is primarily a Jesuit institution, it was found that 75.9% of our respondents considered themselves Christian, and the second that came right behind was they considered themselves atheists, as they believe in no religion. So for the data procedures, I did an analysis of the data. I did a correlation from, as stated earlier, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to relate the commonalities to the background information since I had extra time. So what I did is I picked the 5 most important correlations that I thought were significant to the study, and I produced them into graphs. So for my results, the first correlation is listening. The first question I asked was does listening to high tempo music before a big game / match, and I correlated that with high tempo music gets me pumped up, hyped before a big game / match. It was found that most people agreed that listening to high tempo music before a big game / match, they preferred that, and they also found that they chose this reason because it got them pumped up and hyped. And they showed a correlation value of 0.575952646, which shows that there's some correlation, but it's not extremely significant compared to the others that are going to be presented. The second graph that I produced was low tempo music gets me calm and relaxed on a normal basis, and listening to low tempo music predominantly gets me ready before big games and matches. So a lot of respondents agreed with the fact that they get calm and relaxed before a big game / match, but they disagreed with the fact that they would listen to it before a big game. The third correlation graph that I have had an extremely high correlation value. It was 0.7183, and it compared listening to low tempo music predominantly when I have big games / matches versus low tempo music gets me in competitive mindset. It showed that most of them agreed that they would not listen to low tempo music before a big game, and most of them also agreed with the fact that they don't think low tempo music gets them in a competitive mindset at all. The fourth correlation graph had a somewhat of a correlation with the 0.608. and it showed that high tempo music, I asked the respondents if high tempo music gets them in a competitive state, and then I also asked the following question. I listened to high tempo music predominantly when I had big game/matches. It showed that most respondents agreed with both, that they would listen to high tempo music because it gets them in a competitive state, and they also chose it mostly for big matches/games. But it didn't show like a significant correlation, which means that there could be some interpretation went further. The last correlation graph had an extremely low correlation, and the reason I chose this one is because I thought this would have a high correlation. The type of music high school boys listen to versus the competitive levelness of their sport. And the competitive level relates back to the motivation, because I wanted to see if kids with a higher competitive level had a change in their music taste, and it showed that there was zero correlation to any of that. So my theory was that if a varsity kid plays at a higher level, they would probably listen to higher tempo music because it gets them in the right state of mind. So for my discussion, it showed that the majority of respondents overall said that low tempo music gets them calm and relaxed on a normal basis compared to high tempo music. But why do they choose high tempo music over low tempo music? And this was in relation to Zhang and her colleagues from the literature review before. And also 80% of the respondents prefer to listen to high tempo music before a big game/match, which is kind of interesting. But this was in alignment to a interview done with Canadian Olympians who said that they would prefer high tempo music over low tempo music over before an Olympic match. So for my limitations, it was shown that I didn't really have enough time to expand my research to more people. I was kind of confined to the area of Brophy College Preparatory, and if I really wanted, if I had more time, I would expand it to other demographic groups. As seen in my chart earlier, I had around almost 70% of respondents that were white. I'd like to get a more even distribution of my demographics. And the second limitation that's kind of obvious is that we go to Brophy College Preparatory, which is primarily a white and a Jesuit school. So, and it's a private institution too. So majority of my respondents were white, upper class, and Christian. The last thing is that my study was too narrow and it kept changing a lot of times. So I lost a significant amount of time, and I feel like if I had to go back, I feel like I could use this lost time in order to ask more questions and maybe even expand my survey to other schools. So for my conclusion, the 5 significant findings could be helpful in the future. Although there wasn't many correlations that I found, I felt those 5 were the strongest to appeal to the reader or for future researchers. And it was shown that there is some commonality between music and the perception of sports performance. However, some of them could be used with further research with an actual experimental research design. They should actually test actual performance instead of perception. Although mine tests on perceptions, it doesn't translate to actual performance at all. And it was shown that, for my conclusion, that there's a higher number of athletes that listen to high tempo music. Thank you.